Hey, Jim.
Hey, Vanessa.
You know how we're just like a dumb video game podcast on the internet,
Mm-hmm.
and no one should really ever pay us any attention or any mind?
I insist on it.
And yet, somehow, by some weird permutation of fate, we have managed to, I guess, is trick the right word?
I wouldn't say trick, but I would say he probably didn't have the full context of our podcast in mind when he offered to be a
Yeah,
guest.
he probably didn't realize the very, very narrow scope of our audience. But we sat down and talked to writer director Billy Ray.
Yeah, should we explain how that kind of came into existence?
Why don't we?
So it's long been, or I don't know, maybe long been, maybe not. It's part of kind of show canon that I love the movie Shattered Glass. It's one of my favorite films. I watch it probably more often lately, but maybe once a month. I like it. It's like one of those bedtime movies that you can put down and know you'll be entertained, but also like it's not like super taxing from an attention standpoint. Um,
Well, not once you've seen it like once a month,
yeah.
every month.
But like there are no like explosions or
Yeah, it's
people
not
screaming or
aggressive. Mhm.
yeah. Um and I love it. And we were joking about it a few weeks ago on Twitter because you just rewatched it recently.
That's right. And I tweeted the big bad bionic boy has been here, baby.
And then I tweeted a reply, and then I tweeted another reply, and thought, "What the hell?" I tweeted at Billy Ray, who's the writer director, and said, "We really love your movie." And within like an hour of that tweet going out, he liked it, and he sent me a DM on Twitter that said, "Hey, thanks for the kind words." And I said, "Yeah, of course we love the movie on the podcast. We talk about it." And he's like, "I'll be on your show." And
I
it's
know.
like
It was just like, and at that point is when I became convinced that we were being catfished or it was some sort of elaborate prank.
Yeah, I was kind of doing like a live update in the Facebook group, just kind of posting screenshots as they were coming in. And when I saw that he offered to be on the show, I was like, do I want to put this on there? Because I can't imagine, one, like it was hard for me to believe, one, he was being genuine, and two, that the offer would still be on the table once he did some independent research on the show.
Right.
But he was a class act all the way and was very flexible with scheduling. And once we got him here, we had a fantastic
It
conversation.
was really great. Really, really smart guy, clearly really thoughtful about what he's putting out into the world
Hmm.
and what he can do as a writer and a creative person to make the world a better place, which is fantastic. But it is going to be a little bit different than what you're used to hearing from this show.
Yeah, we it there's no gaming talk. We do say the words video games, but it's just in the context of talking about one of the films that he wrote.
Right.
So that's it. So this is going to be, I would say, a good 80 to 85% politics discussion, in the context of Billy Ray's films and his projects and his and what he's passionate about. Um, and some really great anecdotes about some of his films as well.
Yeah. But for those of listeners who are not familiar, you may be thinking, oh, I haven't had a chance to see Shatter's Glass yet. First of all, it's free on YouTube, so you have no excuse. And it's not terribly long either. So it just like it's a great movie and it's paced almost like a thriller, I would say. Like it really moves.
Yes.
Like it's
And it's a very tight film.
mhm.
It knows what it's doing and what it wants to communicate, and does so in a not overly long fashion, and it's well cast and the performances are great.
My favorite Peter Skarsgård performance. Is that his name? Did I say it wrong? Oh no.
It's Sarsgaard, right?
Yeah, I said Skarsgård.
Peter Sarsgaard.
Yeah, you see, this is the reason no one should be talking to us. So maybe you haven't seen that or heard of that. You have probably heard of the Hunger Games movie. Maybe you have heard of Overlord or Terminator: Dark Fate.
Hmm.
Uh, Maybe you've heard of Captain Phillips.
Yeah, maybe you watched his James Comey Donald Trump miniseries on Showtime.
Yeah, Comey role.
Hmm.
So what's really so interesting about his career is like whatever you're interested in or into, he has written a movie that you'll like.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things when I because I've been a fan of the movie for a long time, and when I looked up his credentials, I was surprised he's had his fingers on so many things that I've enjoyed over the past 15 years.
Yeah.
Uh it's pretty incredible the scope of his resume.
We hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Again, thank you so much to Billy Ray for doing this. We had an amazing time. Again, a lot of politics talk, and that might be my fault because that is my favorite thing to talk about. And I think one of his things too. Um, so yeah, enjoy. And again, if you haven't seen Shattered Glass, you don't need to see it before you listen to this, but you might want to. Just hit that pause and get on the YouTubes and do yourself a favor. It's a real treat.
Yeah, maybe we'll throw a link to the movie in the show notes. Um, so that's there, and then we'll throw a couple other things in the show notes that Billy talked about. But yeah, we hope everybody enjoys it. This is something different for us, but something we all really enjoyed.
It was so much fun.
All right, everybody. Without further ado, here is our conversation with Billy Ray.
We are here with writer director Billy Ray. You know his work from Overlord, Captain Phillips, The Hunger Games, and of course, Jim Banks' favorite movie, Shattered Glass.
That's what kicked this whole thing off.
Yeah, so we are really excited to have you here to join us in talking about the film.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Shattered Glass, for those who don't know in our audience, although we hope that you have all watched it by now, is the story of a journalist who was, well, maybe actually you should do the summary, Billy. You probably know it better than I do. Like, let me tell you what it's about.
Stephen Glass was a superstar reporter at the New Republic magazine. He was the reporter all the other reporters wanted to be. He was also writing for George magazine and Harper's and all kinds of other magazines. He was very sought after. Unfortunately, he had made up 27 of the 41 articles that he had reported for the New Republic magazine, and they never caught him because they didn't demand pictures back in those days. He was brought down by an editor named Chuck Lane, who now writes for the Washington Post. And Shattered Glass is, at least for me, on an emotional level, it's the story of what would happen if the least popular kid in high school had to take down the most popular kid in high school. That's what that movie is. It just happens to be set in a world that I thought was really interesting. A magazine that called itself the In-Flight Magazine of Air Force One.
It really struck me in rewatching it recently how much it resonated with me with this talk about fake news and how journalism has really become entertainment, and those lines are so much more blurred than it was. And I think he was caught in 97, 98, around that.
Okay.
Is that so? I'm sure that's occurred to you as well.
Well, I grew up in a house where Woodward and Bernstein were heroes. You know, that idea of journalist as fighter for the right, that runs very, very deep with me. You know, I'm the kid who ran home in fourth grade to watch the Watergate hearings. And so people who reported the truth were, I lionized them. I always did, I still do. So to see what Stephen Glass did, yeah, that shook me up. And to see what is now being ascribed to the media, you know, to have CNN or MSNBC or the New York Times or the Washington Post be called fake news. We're seeing the danger of that, you know, in swing districts right now in America.
Yeah, it's chilling.
52% of the Americans in those districts believe that Joe Biden actually won that election. That means that 48% don't believe that.
Right.
know.
As Patrick Moynihan once said, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts.
Mhm.
And we now have a world in which some people believe they are entitled to their own facts, which would be fine if they just screamed into their pillow, but they don't. They go out and act on those facts, which is how we
Mm.
like Capitol riots on January 6th.
Yeah, it's I feel like I'm still processing just the impact that all of this news has had on how we live. I mean,
The next thing that I'm writing and directing is about January 6th. I'm doing a 6-part miniseries for Showtime that's about January 6th. And the basic idea of the piece is that it is the duty of all patriots to defend their country. And
mhm.
one thing that I can say about everybody on January 6th is that's what they believed they were doing. I don't think any of the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers or the Three Percenters or QAnon or the Boogaloo Boys or the Boomer Waffen or America Firsters, I don't think they woke up in the morning and said, I'm going to go do something evil.
Of
I
course
think
not.
they truly believed they were saving their country.
Mhm.
How do
And
you communicate that in the writing without making them seem sympathetic or seeming like you're identifying with where they're coming from?
I don't think there's anything wrong with identifying where they're coming from. If you're telling the story of an Oath Keeper or an America Firster or a Proud Boy or someone who's in QAnon who believes that what they are doing is righteous, you just turn on the camera and let them talk.
That's interesting.
And then you juxtapose them with Michael Fanone, who was, one of the Metropolitan Police,
Mhm.
who almost lost his life on that day, or Harry Dunn, who did the same thing, or any of the others, or Jamie Raskin, who's the congressman who had the world's worst week that week and
Mhm.
still stood up for his country.
Mm.
Ultimately, the facts win in the end, and it's clear that the people who were storming the Capitol had been wildly and dangerously misinformed. That does not make them animals, and that does not make them traitors to their country. Unfortunately, it makes them criminals because they
Mhm.
broke the law.
I think that there's an instinct, certainly in me, and I believe in a lot of people, to try to point to the singular cause. Like where's the root of this misinformation that if we can just pull that up, we can go back to the way things were in that Woodward and Bernstein era. Do you have that instinct, and do you think that there is one, or
Oh
is
yeah.
this?
Oh sure. It seems very, very clear to me, and has been clear to me since the second Donald Trump said that all Mexicans were rapists and criminals.
Mm.
Um, the second he said that and paid no political price for it, in fact, caught a political tailwind for it. The second that happened, January 6th was 100% inevitable, in my opinion. There was no way to avoid what happened on January 6th. Everything from that point forward was actually kind of easy to predict because what Donald Trump was saying essentially was that there is a group of Americans who are largely white, who
Mhm.
feel left out of the political process and feel unseen and unheard by their government. And if you speak to them and pander to them, they will accept anything from you
Mm.
because they want to feel empowered once again. Hillary Clinton, I'm sure, would have made a great president, but she was a horrendous candidate. And part of what made her horrendous was she never spoke to white males ever.
Mhm.
And they're 37% of the population. That's a pretty big chunk to just ignore.
Mhm.
Donald Trump did not ignore them. And he went after them in a very specific and very cynical way. If you draw a map in 2016 of counties that Trump won, and then you draw a map of counties where there was opioid devastation in America, it's the same map.
Mhm.
Not like 99%, it's 100%. It's the same map.
It's interesting.
He went where there was despair. He turned it into anger, which is, of course, a much more positive emotion to feel. Despair, you have to blame
Right.
yourself. Anger, you can blame on somebody else.
Mhm.
And then he weaponized it.
Mm.
And once that happened, truth was no longer a factor. It just wasn't a consideration in anybody's calculation. And they would put up with anything for him. I mean, if you think of it this way, he ran in 2016 on 4 promises. Mexico will pay for the wall.
Mhm.
I will drain the swamp. I will make your healthcare better and cheaper, and I will bring back manufacturing.
Mm.
He had a Republican House and a Republican Senate, went 0 for 4 on those promises, and no one cared.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yeah.
Because what he was speaking to in his to his believers was something that had nothing to do with politics, and it had nothing to do with fact. It was just about identity and their feeling that their identity was being attacked. And he said, fuck that. I'm not going to let that happen to you. And so, of course, they stormed the Capitol for him, of course, because of the way they're storming it for themselves.
I know a lot of people have been watching this new QAnon documentary that has come out. I haven't had a chance to see it, but I know just from what I've read and heard that there have been several instances of like, this is the day that Trump is coming back predictions. And it just seems to me exactly like any comet-based doomsday cult, you know, the idea that like, this is definitely the day and it doesn't happen, but people stick with it.
Okay, so go back and look at the origins of QAnon. The origins of QAnon, and by the way, one of the characters that I'm writing about is Ashley Babbitt, who was the woman who was shot on January 6th, storming the Capitol. She was the most famous fatality of that day. She was a QAnon believer, absolutely. She was a 14-year Air Force vet and former Obama supporter, but she got radicalized online and became a QAnon supporter. So let's go back to the core of that. The core of that was Pizzagate. Pizzagate was the belief that Bill and Hillary Clinton were running a child trafficking farm, for lack of a better term, in the basement of a pizza parlor, which, by the way, did not have a basement. But
right, and on its surface, that seems like such an absurd statement, but you can't discount it.
However, what it allows you to do, if you are the people who are propagating this story, is your hashtag can be Save the Children.
Right.
Who's against saving the children?
Yeah.
Nobody. And so I think a lot of the people who were drawn into Pizzagate, again, were not evil people. These are people who said, wait a minute, there's child trafficking. I'm against child trafficking. Let's go. And because the Clintons, and by the way, I voted for Bill Clinton twice, because the Clintons were so susceptible to charges about personal ethics, the story gained some traction. You know, they made themselves I think, targets for that kind of crazy thinking. But again, Pizzagate starts on Save the Children, and then out of that grows QAnon, which is essentially one person or several people doing Q drops on 4chan or 8chan, essentially saying Democrats are child traffickers. Okay, well, not only do I not believe that, but I know for a fact that it's not true. However, if they catch you in a moment of susceptibility, who's for child trafficking?
Right.
Nobody.
Right.
So you're going to click and find out more, or at least try to. And once you're there, it's like the poster. Once you're down that rabbit hole, it's really tough to get out. You know, and I think COVID played a gigantic role in all of this. That feeling that people had that they were stuck, that the government was imposing new restrictions upon them. The mask became this symbol of things that were really difficult for people to accept. And by the way, speaking of your particular site, there's a huge game component to it.
Oh, totally.
Because the Q drops are ways in which people can play a game to try to figure out what the Q drops mean and compete with one another or team up with one another to try to determine, you know, what those tea leaves mean. So it's hugely engaging, aside from anything else.
It's community too. I think like anything, any fandom really, you know, if you look at people who are super into science fiction shows or in our world, you know, super into a particular kind of game, it brings together the sense of belonging, I think, and that can be so misused.
But what it comes down to get back to your original question, is it doesn't have to be true to be effective. That's the danger. And for that, you can trace something back even farther. You know, when I was growing up, I'm way before all of your time. I was born in 1963. And when I was growing up, there were 3 network news shows, right? There was ABC, NBC, and CBS. And they were pretty middle of the road. Nobody argued about their factuality. Right? When Walter Cronkite came back from Vietnam in 1968 and said, I don't think this war is winnable, Lyndon Johnson said, I've lost the country.
Mm.
The second Lyndon Johnson heard Walter Cronkite say that, he knew people would believe Walter Cronkite, and that's why he didn't run again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's a certain consistency of factuality when we all agree on what the facts are, and then we just interpret them differently. In other words, Republicans and Democrats can look at a set of facts and say, well, this means X or this means Y, and they both have valid points of view.
Mm-hmm.
If the argument is Republicans are saying, well, that means we need less government, the Democrats are saying, no, that actually means we need a little bit more government. Okay, that's a fair fight.
Mm-hmm.
Once people started choosing news that they agreed with, that all went out the window. In other words, if you choose Fox News because it agrees with you, then Fox News is incentivized to say only things that will agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they're not reporting the news anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They're reporting 1/100th of the news, right? Then we're fucked.
Mm-hmm.
Because once that happens, then there is no universal set of facts that we all agree on.
But it makes you feel good about yourself, right? And I'm guilty of that. I'll watch, Don Lemon and be like, oh, Don is saying exactly what I've been ranting about all day. How good it feels to have that validation of,
Correct. News is not to validate you. News is to educate you.
Mm-hmm.
We have totally abandoned that in America. And that's just intellectual laziness on top of everything else.
Well, I could talk about this for an entire hour, but I don't want to escape your CV here. But as a writer, it must be so interesting to watch these narratives being spun when that's your job, right? Is to always be looking for the story and looking for connection.
Sure. I mean, I love true stories. They've been very, very good to me. I tend to gravitate towards them because I find actual human behavior to just be more interesting, more idiosyncratic, more nuanced than anything that I could create. As I said, when I was making the Comey Rule, which is about James Comey and Donald Trump, and that was also on Showtime, could I have created two better characters than James Comey and Donald Trump?
No, I've seen.
I mean, that's just that is just Shakespearean, and it was handed to me, and I couldn't do better than that. And I felt the same way about Captain Phillips. I felt the same way about Richard Jewell or Shattered Glass or Breach or any of the others that I've worked on that are true stories. They don't play out like video games, but as studies of behavior, I find them really compelling.
Mm-hmm. How does your approach to a true story or story about actual people differ from writing, for example, the Hunger Games script, which I imagine came with a lot of pressure? I mean, that's a beloved book.
Well, it just goes to show you how not cool I am. My agent called me and said, hey, do you want to do the Hunger Games? And I literally walked into my house. I think my kids were 14 and 9. And I said, what's the Hunger Games? And they both, like, those gifts where the character goes, that's what my kids did. Like, oh my God, Dad, you're so hopeless. So I got the book and I read it overnight and I thought, this is the best idea I've ever heard in my life. Like, this is just stunningly great. And so I went in for a meeting at Lionsgate, which was the studio. And I don't know how many people were in the room, probably 6 or 7. And one of them was the producer. Her name is Nina Jacobson. And so I was saying, okay, I love this. I'm doing it. I'm in. Here are some storytelling problems in the book that I think we need to address. And Nina kept saying, no, you can't change that. No, you can't change that. No, you definitely can't change that. And I said, why? And it became really clear that she was online all day with fanboys. And they were saying, don't fucking change anything about the Hunger Games. And she was feeling a lot of pressure about it. And so I respected that. And I said, okay, Nina, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go write a draft. And you're going to think I've changed too much. And we're going to fight about it. And the friction of that is going to yield the right script that's going to get you a director. And that's what happened. And then Gary Ross came in and he made it his. And it's very, very much his movie. The reason I bring all this up is because somewhere in my brain, when I was reading that book, and it's a testament to the book and to what Suzanne Collins did, I decided that it was a true story. Somewhere in my head, something clicked. This is a true story. And that allowed me to write from a place of complete outrage. Like, how could a government do that to children? This is appalling. And I wrote from that rage. And I think that's why the scripts had life to it. It just became a true story for me.
It's the Pizzagate rage, right? How could the
Yes.
government do this to those children? I will say, in watching that movie, and I'd read the books and liked them quite a bit, but I felt like the movie itself, especially Katniss's home and her world, gave me more information than I had from the book, which I think is the best thing a movie interpretation can do.
I think that's fair. And I thought Gary did a great job. And I'm thrilled to have my name on a movie that was such a big hit. But it's very much Gary's movie. Absolutely Gary's movie.
And when we were talking with some of our listeners about you being on our show, they were like, you have to talk about Overlord. You have to talk about Overlord. I think in our worlds that it's probably the most gamified movie, I would say, just in the sense of, a very clear objective, a group of people, very clear kind of bad guys and good guys. That must have been fun to write.
Okay. Do you want to hear the story of that movie?
I would love to.
Okay. That was, I literally woke up one morning and a movie fell into my head. And that had never happened to me before, ever. Movies, I mean, the movies I'm drawn to are, like Shattered Glass. Like, they take a half hour to do it.
Right.
And with this one fell into my head. It's okay. Two guys, the night before D-Day, parachute into France. They get caught behind enemy lines. They wind up in this weird little French village. They meet this woman, and they find out something really fucking strange is happening in that village. And in the original concept, it was a ghost story. There were ghosts in the village, including the woman, Chloe. Okay, so I thought to myself, all right, this is exactly what happened to Paul McCartney when he came up with the song Yesterday. He woke up and the song was in his head, and it was so complete in his head that he literally went around to people humming it, saying, where have you heard this? Where have you heard this?
Wow.
And after asking like 10 people and no one had heard it, he thought, Jesus, maybe I just dreamed a song. And in fact, he didn't have the lyrics, he just had the music. And so as a place setter, he called it Scrambled Eggs. And he would literally say, Scrambled Eggs, right? And that became Yesterday. Anyway, so I was doing the same thing. Like, okay, have I already seen this movie? Because it seemed so clean. And I had. So I thought, okay, I want to develop this with a director who thinks like a writer. So I called J.J. Abrams, who I knew a little, but not terribly well. And I went and met with him and his team. I said, okay, this meeting is either going to be a minute long or we're going to get to work.
Right.
And I tell him a minute. And he says, okay, that's like such a great idea that it's actually annoying. So we went and set it up at Paramount. So I was getting paid to write it. And I wrote, I don't know how many drafts for JJ. And then JJ went off to make his first Star Wars movie. So now JJ's not the director anymore. So then Robert Zemeckis comes in. And I wrote, 8 drafts for Zemeckis.
Wow.
And somewhere along the line, it stopped being ghosts and it started being zombies. I don't actually remember which draft that was. And then Zemeckis went off to do another movie. So now I'm down 2 directors. Then they bring in Julius. And by that point, I had to go because I was going to make a TV show called The Last Tycoon, which I dearly, dearly loved. So they brought in another writer behind me. And then the movie just started being a different thing, and not for better or worse, just a different movie that I could barely recognize. I can take credit for the initial opening sequence, which I really love.
Oh, that's an incredible sequence where he's on the plane.
Everything that happens on the plane and everything that happens when they crash and land and almost drowning and finding the town and all that's me. And they meet the girl and they get taken into the house, and the attic and the broken leg and all that stuff.
Mhm.
That was all me. And I was there for quite a bit of the zombie stuff, but it really became much more of a video game, and that's not my strength at all.
Mhm.
Sure.
The difference was in the draft that I wrote, the two leads, Boyce and Ford, were best friends
Mm.
and had been best friends for a long time, and the whole movie was about a test of their friendship. And the new idea was to have them be relative strangers, and to have one of them be black. That was not in any of my drafts.
Mhm.
And to have like a Creole background there. That was not in any of my drafts either. And it, again, it's not better or worse. It's just different. But that movie wound up being, for a very select group of people, a lot of fun.
Mhm.
Yeah. I was very, very pleasantly surprised by it.
Speaking of movies with a lot of drafts, I don't know if in your original script for Terminator Dark Fate, if was it set in Mexico at the start in your script?
Yes.
Because that
was before me. That came before me.
Okay.
When I came aboard Terminator, what happened was over a year before I showed up on Terminator, they had a writer's room. Jim Cameron had a writer's room.
Right.
And they broke 3 movies. And then they sent off a pair of writers to write the first movie. And that's what I was brought in to rewrite, was that script.
Okay. Because I watched that in theaters, and my feeling was I hadn't seen a blockbuster that treated a country like Mexico as a place with people and infrastructure and like life to it.
Right.
It wasn't shot with that traffic yellow filter. You know, I'm a dailies colorist, so I get very
nerdy. You can say nerdy.
Nerdy, yeah, I get very nerdy about color.
Sure.
And just the way that it was shot, like a place you live in, people have lives in, was so different, and I loved it. And I really liked that, like the opening was a sort of day in the life before it becomes this sci-fi. And so I just wanted to compliment you on that.
Well, thank you. Tim Miller's a great director, and Jim Cameron knows a thing or two.
Yes.
And so, for me, I'm not typically in the business of writing the 6th or 7th, movie in a
Sure.
But I wanted to write Sarah Connor.
Right.
That was it for me. And they could have set that movie on the fucking moon, and I would have said that. Because I just wanted to write Sarah Connor. I wanted to meet Linda Hamilton, and I wanted to honor that character who's meant so much to me. And I was not disappointed. That was a great experience.
Yeah, and she is fantastic in that too.
She's great in that movie. Yeah.
We had.
I will tell you, when I was writing it, and I wrote the line where she shows up and then says, "I'll be back." And like 10 people involved with the movie wrote to me saying, no, they're gonna kill us. I said, are you out of your mind? That's going in the trailer. I'm never cutting it. You might cut it. I'm not fucking cutting it. That's the trailer moment. I'm usually wrong about that stuff, but I was right about that.
We had someone tell us, who knew we were going to do this talk, please thank him for writing a Terminator movie about women. And that resonated a lot. I mean, as a woman in a relatively male area, video games, nerd stuff, it's sort of a renaissance, especially between characters like Katniss and looking at the new Star Wars films. I feel like, young nerdy girls are having their moment. I'm a little bit jealous, actually.
I can appreciate that. But, the truth is, it's been happening for a while now. When I think about Mad Men and how much attention that show paid to Peggy and to Betty, it was so determined to tell the story of women in the early 60s. And that was a pretty ballsy choice. When I think about how much screen time on Game of Thrones goes to the female characters, this is the way of the world now, and it's better.
It's exciting. And I really genuinely feel, fictional or real, it makes you a better person to hear stories that aren't about yourself. And
For sure, of course.
Well, I mean, even in Shattered Glass, the female character, like you have Chloe Sevigny and Rosario Dawson as the main female leads, and they're both so good.
They're fantastic. And by the way, the Rosario part was written for a guy.
Oh, really?
Oh, interesting.
That was supposed to be a guy named Andy, and Rosario. It was either going to be Rosario or Chloe for the Chloe part, and Chloe got it. And then I went back to Rosario. I said, "Look, if I turn this other person into a woman, would you play it?" And thank God she said yes. And then Melanie Linsky was awesome, and
she's
she's
great.
awesome.
Yeah, I don't want to gloss over her.
I've been very, very fortunate. I've worked with some incredible actresses, but I learned how to direct by directing them.
Right.
They were just awesome.
This was one of your first directing roles, wasn't it?
Shattered Glass was my first.
Oh, that's amazing.
What made you want to make Shattered Glass your first?
I had written a movie called Heart's War that was shooting in Czechoslovakia in January. I don't know if you ever had the pleasure of being in the Czech Republic in January. It's cold. It's like stupid cold. And we were shooting, it's a World War II movie, and we were shooting a scene outside. And everybody was freezing their tail off. Every extra, every crew member, everybody. But I was the writer of the movie. I was sitting in the trailer and I was warm. I was warm. Something about that bothered me on that day. Something said to me, like, I don't mean it in a pretentious way. Like it wasn't, I'm not suffering enough for my art. It was, I'm not on the front lines of this movie in the way that the director is. And sure enough, the movie came out and we did not do well. Like the box office was a disaster. I got hired for 3 more jobs off that script in a way that other people did not. I mean, they suffered for their attachment to that movie, the way that a writer doesn't. And so it was time to find out, like, if I could stand in front of the movie and take the bullet for it. And so Shattered Glass made a lot of sense because it had no car chases, nothing blew up, no chase scenes, no nudity. There was nothing in there like craft driven that I knew I had no idea how to do. It was just, can you capture tone and can you capture performance? Yes or no? And so it was time to find out if I was grown up enough to do that. And it turns out that I was, which was a great shock to me. And I can also say with pretty good confidence, Peter Sarsgaard is the reason I got to direct a second movie, because his performance in Shattered Glass is so great. People gave me credit for it. And
we've talked amongst ourselves about just some of his expressions towards Steven in the movie, just like it lands like a car explosion almost. They're just so devastating.
It's incredible. And Peter once said to me that he thought the entire second half of the movie, all he does is say, Steve.
But it works.
He thinks that's his entire performance. But kind of a funny story. 2 years after Glass was in the theaters, I actually met Stephen Glass.
Oh, wow.
I had heard via the New York Times that Stephen had seen the movie. There was actually an article about what it was like for him to watch the movie, and he said that he stared at his shoe tops 90% of the time, which I believe.
I think I remember that article.
And I had tried to get a hold of him, obviously, when I was writing the movie, through his lawyer. And I think they took the request seriously, but Stephen did not want to help me make that movie, which I understood. So 2 years later, I had heard that he had moved to LA, which is where I live, and that he was in fact working for a lawyer very near where I live. So one night I'm at a party, and I don't go to a lot of parties, but I was at this one, and Stephen Glass walks in.
Yeah.
And he doesn't recognize me.
Right, but you must have.
Of course, I recognize him.
Yeah.
And the host of the party introduces us. Hey, this is my friend Stephen. Hey, this is my friend Billy. And I said, so Stephen, do you have a few minutes? Because I think you and I should probably sit down and talk. And he said, why? I said, because I'm that Billy. And his eyes just went like so wide.
Oh.
And we sat down and talked for like a half hour at this party. And I wanted to know, did he feel we got the story right? Which, you know, was very ironic. And we talked. And he wanted to be a screenwriter. I said, here's my email. I'm happy to help you in any way I can. And then a couple years after that, a guy out in LA who would periodically do screenings of movies that he loved for friends of his called me and said, I'm going to do a screening of Shattered Glass. I'm going to have about 100 people there. Would you like to come and do a Q&A afterwards? I said, yeah, sure. And it was free pizza. Sure, why not? A day before, he says, oh, by the way, Stephen Glass is also coming to do the Q&A.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's great.
So Stephen and I meet and have some pizza, and we watched the movie together with 200 people, because it was the biggest turnout they ever had. And then we do a Q&A together.
Wow.
And at that point, strangely enough, we became friends. And I was very, very active in the political space in 2018, doing all kinds of things. And I once invited him to a phone bank that I was doing for the Democratic Party. He came.
That's
and
amazing.
I'll never forget the guy. There was a friend of mine named Ian who was sitting at a table he was, you know, calling voters in Orange County, and Glass sits next to him. And my friend Ian looks at me and goes, is that fucking Stephen Glass? I go, yeah, that's Stephen Glass. Anyway, so that's my Stephen Glass story.
Yeah. Well, he's not an unsympathetic character in the film, and I think it's important to remember how young he was when that was going on too.
Look, I think the reason why I was able to connect to that movie and prior to that script, because I know Stephen Glass. I am Stephen Glass in a lot of ways. I know that feeling of growing up, you know, where he grew up, Highland Park. That's Encino, California. They're the same place. And, you know, there's that line in the movie, you know, if your kid's not a doctor or a lawyer, you keep your drapes closed. I get that. I understand that pressure. There's no Jewish kid in the world who grew up and didn't have some version of that pressure applied. So I understand him. And the flip side of me is I understand Chuck Lane.
Right.
I understand, you know, the sort of Dudley Do-Right guy who just thinks the rules have to be followed and laws have to be obeyed and standards have to be met. And, you know, it can be a pretty confusing place in that little brain of mine because both those voices are there. And that's why that movie, at least for me, was the right movie. I felt it very deeply.
Right.
That's one thing I like about the script in that movie is especially Chuck is so good at articulating how offensive everything he's done is, like, to his journalistic sensibilities.
Yes.
He's just so outraged by it. I just love that.
Well, I do too, and thank you. And you know, that movie is about today.
Right.
I just didn't know it when I was making it.
Yeah.
I wish I could say, oh, you know, this was this, you know, cautionary tale
Yes.
time capsule thing that we don't have to think about anymore.
I know, weren't we nuts back in 1998?
Right.
Yeah.
No, and what I find that the afterlife of that movie, I'd say probably more than anything I've ever worked on, and it certainly wasn't the biggest hit of anything I ever worked on, but many more people talked to me about Shattered Glass than about Hunger Games or Captain Phillips, and those were hits.
It's shown in
and I also-
classrooms, right? Like in journalism school.
I get
they
asked
watch
about,
it.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I
Yeah,
get
I'm
asked
sorry.
about it. I get asked to speak to journalism classes all the time.
That's
That's
where
exactly
I first
what
saw
I
the
was
movie
saying, yeah.
was in journalism school.
Is that right? Where'd you go?
I went to Kansas State.
And they showed it there?
Yeah.
Should have called me. You have no idea like what a Shattered Glass whore I am. It doesn't matter. Anybody who wants to talk to me about that movie, I'm down. Let's go.
That's great.
I will admit that we had a little bit of like, are we being catfished when you
Yeah, well, you
offered to be on our
you were
show.
so gracious when in your messages. I was like, well, like I obviously tagged like the wrong account and somebody's trolling us.
No, although that does happen to me. I'll tell you a funny story about that. My political activism is sort of a matter of public record because I'm on Twitter. And so this one person reached out to me, and it turns out they teach a special needs class in Houston. And I said, well, I'd like to hear more about that. And can you tell me more about what you do? And they said, God, that's really touching. And, I so appreciate your using your, your status to advance causes that you care about. I said, thank you. That's very, very kind of you. Here's my email. Just write to me because I want to know, what you do in your special needs class and how can I help you? And so the next day I get an email that starts, Dear Mr. Cyrus.
Oh no.
Oh.
and I had to write back, I hate to disappoint you, but I'm not that Billy Ray.
Well, we would much rather have you here than that Billy Ray. I
Yeah.
gotta say, nothing against him, but is there anything else that you want to tell us about this upcoming project? I know we kind of jumped into it, but
Oh, sure. On January 7th, I called a network head that I knew well, and I said, we have to do a story about Ashley Babbitt. We just have to. That's just a movie. And she came back to me and said, okay, can you do like 8 hours? I said, okay, well, if you want 8 hours, then I'm going to have to do a lot of characters, not just Ashley Babbitt. And that's where it started. It started on January 7th. And I started like putting together, okay, who are the right people to tell this story through? I don't know if any of you in high school ever had to read The Bridge of San Luis Rey. It's a Thornton Wilder novel, Pulitzer Prize winner, great novel. But what it's about is there's a bridge in Peru that collapses in 1714 with 5 people on it. They're all strangers. And the book is about who were those 5 people and why were they on that bridge on that day? And it's sort of a perfect construction in terms of storytelling. And by the way, that's how you would structure any disaster movie. Go look at the Poseidon Adventure or the Towering Inferno. You meet a bunch of characters, you find out who they were before the disaster, then you expose them to disaster and you see how they behave. That is a disaster movie. Because the people are the interesting part, right? Yes. So I said, okay, I'm going to pick 8 characters and I'm going to do that. And so that's the idea. And several of them are people who stormed the Capitol. Several of them are cops. There's one lawmaker in there. I think we've chosen the right people. I developed it and then pitched it. Now all the pitch meetings in town are Zoom. So it wasn't in person, but I wound up pitching it to 4 places. 3 of them made offers, which was exciting. And we wound up at the place where we should be. We wound up at Showtime.
It seems so soon after an incident to dive into it. Do you think that, and feel free to tell me to fuck off if this is too personal, is that part of coping for you or processing?
Oh, for sure. It's, first of all, I think that's a very fair question. Can you, so close to an event, can you step far enough back from it to actually gain some objectivity? Having just done that in the Comey rule, I feel confident saying, yes, you can. Because, I was shooting the Comey rule while Donald Trump was still president. And we released it while Donald Trump was still president. And yet we got it right. I mean, we never got attacked for our facts on that. The left was mad at us because we made a movie about Comey, and the right was mad at us because we told the truth about Trump, but nobody said we got the story wrong. So I think it is a fair question to ask, can we tell a story so close to it? But to me, the answer is yes. In terms of why I need to, when I was making the Comey rule, what I kept telling people was, I've made a lot of movies about my country before. This is the first time I've ever made a movie for my country. And that's how I felt about the Comey rule. And that's how I feel about January 6th. I can already see the Republican Party led by knuckleheads like Ron Johnson starting to dismiss and diminish the events of January 6th. Donald Trump was on Fox News 2 days ago saying that the rioters were there hugging and kissing.
Oh yeah, that was infuriating.
Okay, so that may be his version of hugging and kissing, but let's remember 3 officers died as a result of January 6th. 140 were injured. One lost an eye, one lost 3 fingers, several have brain trauma, several had cracked ribs, several had crushed cervical discs, one got stabbed by a metal stake, another 150 contracted COVID on that day. That's a lot of hugging and kissing.
Yeah.
And it's really important to me that next year on January 6th, that I am standing on the ellipse shooting that scene. And that by the midterm elections of 2022, that this has been on the air, so that Americans can see what happened on that day and make up their own minds about who's spinning and who's telling the truth. So this is going to sound like the most pretentious, grandiose, artsy bullshit ever. So let me apologize in advance. But the second Trump was elected, my job changed. My job, to me, part of it now became, I need to reflect America back to itself. I'm in a position where I can do it. I have the energy to do it. Studios and networks will let me do it. And as long as I do it in a truthful way, then I'm going to be worthy of doing it. And that's going to be my career. I really believe that, and you may think this is an overstatement, speaking of Overlord, I do not. But in the same way that Germany, 80 years later, is still making movies about the Holocaust, that country, that culture is still trying to pull that event apart and say, okay, what does this mean?
No, absolutely.
What does it say about us? I believe we are going to be unpacking the meaning of the Trump years for decades to come. What did we let happen to our country, and what does that say about us? And I want to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah. I've felt like more of a patriot over the past 4 years than I ever have in my life. And
Sure,
it seems like the opposite should be true, right?
Yeah,
Like,
well, that's one of the things that was kind of most offensive to me during the Trump years was this. The Trump and his followers took the idea of patriotism and kind of warped it for me. Like they said, what I'm doing is patriotism, not what you're doing, and that was just offensive to me.
And wildly inaccurate. But again, going back to the thing that I'm writing right now, those people on January 6th did not wake up in the morning thinking, I'm going to go do something evil. They thought they were saving their country. Now, the way that I know that's true is because if I put myself in their shoes, let's say that it's January 6th, 2013, and Barack Obama, who I believed in deeply, had just lost an election that I believed he had won. If I was convinced that someone had stolen an election from him, and and Donald Trump was now moving into the White House, and that it was illegitimate, and that the result was going to be disaster for my country, I bet I could have been talked into doing some pretty crazy shit. So I don't question their motives. I have some questions about the guy who gouged out the cop's eye. Yeah, I got some, that guy.
No,
I'd like to ask him a few questions. But in terms of the rank and file of people who were storming the Capitol, I don't question their motives.
I know that we're almost out of time. I want to ask if you want to talk about Georgia just a little bit, because I've seen your recent activism about organizing people to hand out some water, potentially, for the 2022 election.
Yes. Look, there's so much about that bill that is heinous and just anti-democratic and horrible, and so much that is dangerous, and I think infectious. I mean, it'll spread to other states. But the most visible thing about it, the thing that's easiest to make fun of, is that you can't bring water to someone who's standing in a voting line that may be 8 or 10 hours long. As I said, I'm not Christian, but the first thing that came into my mind was Matthew 25, for I was thirsty, and you brought me something to drink, for I was hungry, and you brought me something to eat. A lot of people in Georgia are faith-based voters. And they are now being asked to choose between a Republican legislature and Scripture.
Mhm.
Because what the Republican legislature has asked them to do is exactly the opposite of what Jesus would do,
Mhm.
as we are able to understand what Jesus
Mhm.
would do.
Right.
And so I want to make sure that people understand that contrast and that dichotomy. So I started a working group with about 25, 30 like-minded people,
Mhm.
not all from LA, people from all over the country, including Georgia. And we started brainstorming about what to do about it.
Mhm.
And within an hour, we had locked down iwasthirstyga.org,
Mhm.
which will be our website. And we're going to go break the law. The next time there's an election in Georgia, we're going to go to Georgia and we are going to hand out water.
Mhm.
And if we get arrested, okay, that is something I'm willing to go through, not looking forward to in any
Mhm.
way. There's no part of me that wants to spend a night in a Georgia jail. Believe
Mm.
me, I've heard about Georgia jail.
Mhm.
But if I'm going to get arrested for handing out water to people who are trying to exercise their democratic rights,
Mhm.
okay, I won't be alone. And then we're going to build it out from there.
Mhm.
As I said, there's a lot about that law to attack. We're just going after this hugely visual opportunity.
Well, I think that it's important because it can be so overwhelming, especially with lockdown. It's like we're stuck inside. What can we do to
Right.
look for those little moment? Not a little moment, but you know what I mean. Like a
Sure.
something that you can affect, like on a human to human basis.
Well, what I did, and this is about as far from video gaming as you can get, but what I did after the election of Trump, that election flattened me completely.
Mhm.
I couldn't eat or sleep
Mhm.
for a long time.
Mhm.
I did a lot of crying and had to be medicated. It was pretty bad.
Mhm.
And then I decided, okay, never again am I going to wake up the morning after an election thinking I could have done more.
Mm.
I was not a huge Hillary fan.
Mhm.
So I hadn't done much for her but write a check. And I was never going to do so little again, because you don't know how much democracy means to you until someone takes it away. And it was
Right.
very clear that our democracy was going away for a little while.
Mhm.
So I picked a lane where I thought I could make a difference, which was House races in 2018, the
Mhm.
attempt to flip the House back to the Democrats. And I started working with a brilliant writer named Greg Hurwitz, a novelist who annoyingly had published 20 novels by the age of 45. And he taught me a lot about political messaging. And together, we started working with Democratic candidates running in red districts in 2018. And what we were teaching them was messaging. It was how to sound less like a Democrat, how to make arguments that independent voters can actually hear. Talking about traditional liberal values, but framed in a very different way, so that you don't step on the landmines the Democrats always seem so determined to step on. There's a saying about messaging: Democrats could fuck up a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Mhm.
That's true. That's true. Democrats just don't get messaging at all, and Republicans only get messaging.
Mhm.
Anyway, so Greg and I wound up working with 30 candidates, and that meant speech writing, debate prep, rapid response, whatever they needed. And I'm saying this to your point of what can we do? This
Mhm.
is something I felt I could do. And of the 30 candidates that we helped, 21 of them won, which was pretty
Wow.
exciting on election night.
It's
And
fantastic.
I'm not saying we get credit for those wins. We don't. They were great candidates.
Mhm.
But in some of the closer races, I know we helped.
Mhm.
And that was like crack for me.
Mhm.
Once
Mhm.
that happened and I saw, whoa, we can actually help people. We can make a difference.
Mhm.
Then I was all in. And I was, of course, all in 20, and I remain all in. And now, as you can see, it's affecting the kind of work I do.
Mhm. Well, again, this has not been very video game centric, but I mean, it's all storytelling, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what we try to look for in this show is,
And that's what politicians don't know how to do, is
yeah.
tell stories, and that's our job.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope there wasn't anything that you want to touch on that we missed. uh, but
No.
Yeah, no, again, thank you. You've been incredibly gracious about being on the show, and we really appreciate it. You're the highest profile person that we've had so far, and seriously, it's incredibly appreciated.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm sorry it was all about politics. That's very much
No,
out of
it's
line.
no, not at all. And
we don't shy away from politics if we
My
don't
my
have to.
brothers would be upset though if I didn't say that we watched every single episode of Earth 2 together.
Okay.
So
All right, so before I go, let me just say the story of Earth 2. So this is like 1992 or 93. Amblin TV calls me and says, we want to do Wagon Train in outer space.
Mhm.
I said, okay. At that point, I hadn't done TV, and I thought, yeah, sure, why not? So I go and I develop Wagon Train in outer space, which I called Earth 2.
Mhm.
And I wrote a Bible for the show, which a series Bible essentially lays out the characters, the pilot, and season 1.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And it was a 75-page Bible. At that time, it was the longest show Bible ever written. And they needed a showrunner because I was so young. So they got these 3 showrunners in who had been on Law and Order. And they said, we'll do it, but we have to write the pilot. So I was fired. I was
Yeah.
gone.
Oh wow.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
And so I left my series Bible behind and never had anything to do with the show beyond that. And then watched as it just went into the tank.
Oh,
And
gosh.
it was a pretty big drag because I had big plans for that show.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an angrier show than I thought it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But that was sort of my de-virginizing experience in television.
Well, I apologize for bringing up trauma then.
No, it's okay. One of the things that I want to communicate to your audience, I'm sure among them there are lots of people who want to write,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
whether it's movies or TV or video games or whatever. This is a last laugh business. You're going to get kicked in the head repeatedly as you start. If you can hang in there and just sort of keep your center, eventually the business will start kicking somebody else. And then you stand up and you go to work. But you can't be deterred. There is no writer, nowhere in the world, who didn't suffer these kinds of slings and arrows, and worse. But it's I hate the cliche. It's not how often you're knocked down, it's how often you get back up again. And if you're going to be a writer, you better get ready to get back up again because they will knock you down. It's fine. It's part of the process. Makes you a better person, makes you a better dad, makes you a better writer for sure.
Some of it is just timing. Thinking about the concept of Earth 2, I'm like, that's a, post 2010 show, right? That's like prestige drama, big budget sci-fi show that are the darling of,
Yes. If someone asked me to do it today, I would do it.
All right, putting that out there. All right. Thank you so much, Billy.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Bye.
See ya.
See ya.
All right, everyone. That was our conversation with writer-director Billy Ray. We hope you enjoyed it. Like we said, it was something a little different for the podcast, but we would definitely like to do more of it. We also want to hear your thoughts, so please send us an email with your thoughts on the episode. We're at squarerootspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again, everyone, and we hope you enjoyed. Bye.